Hello, everybody. Welcome back once again to another Crew First Culture podcast. My name is Jeremy, and another episode that really excited for. Been looking forward to this conversation for a while. And today I have got Benjamin Martin with me. How are you doing, Benjamin?
I'm good, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
No problem. I kind of told Benjamin a little bit before we push record. I've kind of got a short list in my head of people that just really speak to me. Just anything I hear from them, it just either seems like they are living the same life that I am, or their head is exactly where I'm at as far as dealing with things. And Benjamin is definitely on that list. I just really enjoy everything I've heard from him. So looking forward to this for sure. And got a little list of things that we can kind of touch on and just let it go. And so I'm looking forward to it. So without anything further, Benjamin, tell us a little bit about yourself, as much or as little as you want to, and we'll get going.
Oh, perfect. I'll just give you the skinny bio. So currently I'm a captain with a large metro department in Virginia. We've got about 600 folks, 20 stations-ish, run about 60,000 calls a year, all hazards approach. And I've been in different parts of it administratively. I worked as a train lieutenant. I've been in pretty much all parts of the county. I'm currently the head of our marine response unit. So we do swiftwater and boat patrol stuff. So that's what I do at work. On the side where I'm passionate, we do the leadership training. So I've been very fortunate over the last few years to have a chance to kind of travel the country and even up to Canada and just share my thoughts and kind of listen to people give me theirs. And I've kind of come to learn what you said, Jeremy, is we're all kind of facing the same challenges. And I look at it as like a take a penny, leave a penny. You know, sometimes I've got some extra pennies to leave, thinking somebody might need them. And sometimes I very much need those pennies to complete the transaction. And then sometimes I don't need either. And so the value that I think like we create when we take time to do stuff like this, when people take time to write books or write articles, just sharing perspective is pretty much what I'm about, and learning as much as I am teaching.
Awesome. Now, I will admit I am not near as good of a host as Chief Corley Moore with the Weekly Scrap. He gave like a gigantic bio on you, and so. But
yeah, I paid him well for that. It was very flattering.
Yeah. So anybody out there, if you are interested in hearing more from Benjamin, and especially as we get into it, I'm sure you will enjoy a lot of what he has to say. He is very easily found out there. Lots of articles, lots of different places. And so I will let him kind of plug whatever he wants to towards the end. But to kind of get going, two big platforms kind of I see your name attached to, and that's Embrace the Resistance, which is basically kind of, from what I understand, is your social media platforms, and Intoxicated Leadership, which from what I understand is kind of one of your main classes you give. So correct me if I'm wrong on either of those, but kind of go into a little bit of where those came from and how you feel those are helping others.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I learned early on is you've got to have some sort of hook, right? So it's just trying to figure out what's unique and what flavor you can add to stuff. And that's where the Intoxicated Leadership and their Embrace Resistance came from. Ironically enough, the name of Embrace Resistance was given to me kind of by a recruit when I was in training. We were flowing a hose line and we were talking about the importance of a nozzle. And I talked about, when we open a nozzle, we can expect that we're going to get some kind of counter reaction to flowing water forward. And he made a comment to the effect of, well, if we shut the nozzle off, we don't have to deal with any of that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but then we're not doing our job. Like, things are getting worse instead of better. And when I started thinking about that, I was like, that's very much what we're doing as leaders. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to make decisions. And sometimes those are the worst kind of moves. Like, I'm just not going to tell you anything. And when you make decisions, some will be popular and easy, and that's great. And some will be very unpopular, and it sucks depending on the degree of unpopularity. But then there are those that are just at another level that, like, in your soul and your gut is the right thing to do, but you just can't find a lot of support for it. So you do them anyway. And those are the examples of, like, we're embracing the resistance that you're going to get from those things. It's what moves the fire service forward. It's what builds integrity, and it
Yep.
really is what defines, I think, is one of the strongest leadership qualities. So it's got nothing to do with politics, because I get asked that all the time. It's unfortunate the times we live in right now. But it very much was this kind of rally cry of like, yes, like let's do this. Let's make this push, like Aaron Fields would talk about. You know, let's do that with leadership. Let's flow and move, as opposed to just like, I'm going to say something, maybe it's inspirational, and then I'm not going to talk to you again for another 3 months until you're flaring up with a personnel or professional problem. So that's the Embrace Resistance side of the house. The Intoxicated Leadership class was actually the second class I put together. The first one I did was on culture, because that was kind of what I was going through. And then I had a very difficult personnel issue that lasted about a year. A lot of times when we talk about conflict, we talk about resolution. This didn't, and still hasn't. It's been, God, almost 8 years now, I think. I mean, it's getting on up there. It still hasn't. And that's the other idea of Embrace Resistance, is like, it's not just you make a decision in a moment, you know, you get black and then it goes away. This is stuff you carry.
Yeah.
You know, the reputation that I have to work from on that issues is still there with some people. And some people will never give me another shake, another fair chance. And like, I earned that. So when I went back and I looked at things I could have done better, I very much found out that when we're talking about emotions and feelings and how people react to things you say, do, what you're about, even simple things like how you ask them to stretch a hose. And you probably all work for these people. Like, you don't like talking with them, you just physically don't enjoy it. Or you ask them a question and you're actually hoping they're wrong, which is kind of counterintuitive. Like, you would want the leader to be wrong, but you've just come to not like this person in the role that they're playing in your life. And so with that, when we allow ourselves to get emotional, that's when we tend to make poor decisions. And when we look at the parts of the brain that emotion works on, it's the same part of the brain that alcohol works on. And when we get highly emotional, it's almost as if we're highly intoxicated. So you don't remember what you said. And think about a fight you've ever had with somebody. Like, you know, some of the drop dead knockout arguments I've had over the years with my wife. I'll wake up the next morning and it's like, oh, I don't even remember what started the fight. Like, I have no idea what we even said. And so you say things you wouldn't normally say. You do things you wouldn't normally do. You have no memory of those things. And like, that's intoxicating. And so I wouldn't want somebody, you know, having a personal issue at home and showing up and trying to be in charge of my fireground, knowing that their brain is operating as if they're legally drunk. And that's in anything, right? I mean, because you can't separate your personal and professional worlds. They are so intertwined, it's not even ridiculous. And so I think, at least when I came through, the culture was that you could physically separate them, but you can't.
Yeah.
You can't do it here, and you definitely can't do it here. And it just kind of follows you. So, you know, there's toxic leadership, which certainly is exactly what it sounds like, but that's the idea behind the phrase intoxicated leadership.
Yeah. Well, I really like both of those analogies, really. Just the whole resistance thing. And I mean, it'd be much easier just to keep it shut and not have to deal with anything, and, you know, be lazy and just coast through whatever we're coasting through. But, you know, what are you gaining out of that? What are the people below you gaining out of that? And it's just not right. And the whole intoxicated thing, I totally see where you're coming from, and how it relates to just human nature and dealing with people. And it's, I just really, really like both those. So that being said, you know, a lot of things you talk about, and remind me again, you're going back to school for, what is it again?
Oh yeah. So I'm working on a PhD in industrial psychology.
Okay. So that's kind of
Exactly, right.
Kind of an
it's
area
like, what
that's,
the hell is that?
No, I get it. I mean, and that is, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's basically studying the psychology of your workforce. So it deals a lot with engagement, motivation, learning, attitude, just kind of understanding why people do what they do. So a lot of people with these degrees will do consulting work with organizations, like change initiatives and morale boosts and stuff like that. For me, it's just kind of like a Rubik's Cube. You know, like, you pick it up and you look at a situation, you're like, holy cow. Like, I think I could orient myself around these 6 sides of this problem, and so you start manipulating and playing with it, and then sometimes you solve it and sometimes you don't. And you just, at best, you hope you set it down better and further along than when you picked it up.
Yeah, and kind of why I was stammering around after you said that is just trying to find the correct way of saying it. But I think just, and you've kind of mentioned it as well in other episodes of a podcast, of just studying human nature and all that. And that is one area that I have quickly found as being still, I've been a captain for around, I don't know, 3.5 years. We are not prepared to deal with humans. Okay, we're somewhat prepared to whatever level to deal with fires and extrications and being in charge of scenes and all of this tactical stuff. But probably the most important thing we should be prepared for, there's nothing out there for it, and that's dealing with humans on a daily basis. And that's why, man, I really feel unprepared and behind the ball on, and I know I'm not alone on it. So
Oh yeah,
that's,
very much so.
it's just huge. Are
Yeah,
you,
absolutely.
so that being said, is that kind of what brought you into the interest in that topic, kind of feeling unprepared, feeling like you needed to gain more knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people that I respect the most in this industry are the ones that are basically a student of the craft. And like Aaron Fields and Jonah Smith and the guys. I mean, all the people we have at the Fireground Commander Conference, I consider just kind of those leading experts. And leadership should be no different, right? Like, and unfortunately, a lot of times leadership is basically expresses opinions, or even worse, it's like, buy this book, 5 steps to be a successful leader, guaranteed.
Yeah.
That's not it.
Yeah.
And I could go up and I could speak to you about my experiences, and you would hear, some commonalities in your stories and mine. But I wanted you to actually learn something. I didn't want you to be entertained solely. I actually wanted you to have something that you could apply, whether it's your personal life
Yeah.
or your professional life. And that's what this has been, is kind of scratching the surface. And then I almost went down the rabbit hole of doing something in neuroscience. Holy cow, that's a little too nerdy. But the industrial psychology was a nice mix. And I see it. And what's cool about that is I get phone calls from all over the United States every week with people going through problems. And that's exactly what I was alluding to with the take a penny, leave a penny. Like, I talk with chief officers, and I don't have the perspective of being a chief officer. I don't have the perspective of being a captain in a volunteer agency. Mine is paid.
Yeah.
I have some volunteer experience as a lieutenant and as, somebody on that side. So relating to their problems, can be challenging, but I think that is probably what the largest drag in any organization in the fire service is the inability for that jump seat firefighter to relate to the challenges that are facing the fire chief, and vice versa.
Yep.
And on and up and down the chain. So anything I can do to kind of make people aware of what's happening in their brain in these difficult moments, whether it's the fire ground or the firehouse, and give them tools to have these conversations that are more effective and easier to navigate, and build these quality relationships that can be leveraged for huge things, right? I mean, it's like when you talk about your go or no go, it's easier to make that go decision even in the highest risk setting when you've put the time in with your team and you've built, reps and sets, and you know what they can and can't do, and you've trained and trained and trained and trained. But if you just throw 3 individuals together, even though they work in the same organization, and you're like, now go, and they're facing the, most unsafe thing you've ever done, you can expect that somebody's going to get hurt, realistically. Even if they all know their job, they don't know it as it relates to each other, like that team thing.
Yeah.
So that's what, I want to talk about. It'll be interesting when I'm all done, because I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to write the dissertation on. But the more I read, and I guess this is the biggest takeaway, Jeremy, the more I read white papers, dissertations, journal articles, or professional publications, the more it verifies what I've experienced already in my gut.
Yeah.
So we talk about leading with your gut. It is. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And so I think sometimes people will leave old things behind if you can convince them and you change how they feel about something. But likewise, I think it's important to reinforce what they do feel. Like, yep, you're absolutely right. That's exactly how I'd handle it, and this is why. Like, this is the science behind that decision, because it literally is that. It's like a biological response, and when you know what causes it, then you know how to navigate it. It's just like understanding fire behavior. It's people behavior. It's the same thing. But like you said, we don't do a good job preparing our leaders for that stuff.
Yeah. And I've heard you mention too, you've taught at conferences before, and people have the choice of seeing you talk about feelings and, the psychological stuff, or go to these gigantic names of guys teaching about, interior attacks and nozzle movement and all that. And it's like, well, it's just not the sexy thing to do,
No.
but it's just when you get, just speaking personally, when I got into the role that I got into, it is so important to really get a grasp on that if you truly want to make a difference, if you truly want to become good at that role of formal leadership and probably even informal leadership. And so, as hard as it is to kind of overcome some of that other stuff that looks so much better, man, it's almost like you want to challenge somebody to head to this area, because this is where you're really going to see some growth. Is that,
Yeah.
you kind of
And
agree with that?
oh, absolutely. And the other thing is, your most passionate and learned firefighters are the ones a lot of times that end up in these leadership roles. And like, I think I talk openly, probably 95% of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of training I did before I got to that lieutenant step, and then the hundreds and hundreds of hours from the lieutenant to the captain step, of the firefighter lieutenant, probably 95% were ops stuff. And then from the lieutenant to captain, it was probably more 50-50. And I know if I ever do the next role, it's got to be 75-20, because it's different. And I think what people need to realize is, like, it's okay to love this job. And when you're a firefighter, or when you're leading from an informal position, which is what I like to call it. I don't like to call it an informal leader and a formal leader. Like, one day you're not leading and one day you are.
Yeah.
Because you are. Like, if you're affecting influence and leading people, you're probably doing it regardless of where you're riding and regardless of your rank. So those folks, like, when we ask them and we look at their roles and responsibilities, almost always it encompasses some sort of degree of stewardship of resources. So take care of the station, take care of the apparatus, take care of your uniform. Like, and that's how we grade them. But when you look at leaders, like, those things are still important, but those things are now the firefighters' concerns. Like, your job as a steward is to take care of the people that the organization trusts you with, as well as the citizens that are in your district and where you respond to calls. And we miss that change sometimes. I know a lot of good officers that could be better if they focused more on the people side of the house instead of, like, the simple, sexy stuff like forcing doors. Like, they're great at forcing a door, but trying to force a point, or trying to force a perch point on a conversation that's difficult, can't do. Have no idea. And when you consider that all of this occurs against the backdrop of kind of a culture that's traditionally management as opposed to leadership, do as I say, even if it's not as I do, yes ma'am, no ma'am, hierarchy, like, we're very built on that, and it doesn't work for today's workforce as much. We're not nearly as much, and it really hasn't been working for a long time. But since that's how our most senior leaders were brought up, like, that's what they expect and they model. Our basic and first and foremost leadership training is just watching the leaders around us and modeling their behavior, what works and what doesn't work, and then making adaptations to it. So if your organization isn't winning, and then that's the only leadership training you have, then it's no surprise your organization isn't winning and isn't going to be winning anytime soon.
There's two areas that I'm going to kind of selfishly bring up with you, just because it's two areas that I need to learn and grow in. And really the first one you kind of touched on just now is, you talked about officers that are, it's easy to go out and do the fun stuff of forcing doors and whatever else, and that I totally agree with. What I struggle with now, and it's kind of tied in as well as something else you mentioned earlier or in another episode, is trying to inspire those around you, or meet them where they're at, or whatever you need to do to just get them engaged. And what you said is trying to make someone, or trying to make everyone love the job as much as you. That's kind of where I have been too, and it's not happening. It's not going to happen. And so that's probably an area right now where I need to figure out what the heck I'm doing and how I need to approach things differently, because I want so badly to inspire the people that aren't bought in as much, that, just, they're there. If we're doing something, they will mostly be engaged. But if you aren't bringing up anything, then fire service doesn't exist. Yeah, we're there at the fire station, but it just isn't talked about unless I'm bringing it up. Well, talk to me about kind of how you feel you have learned to stop expecting everybody to be at the same place as you, but kind of started meeting them where they're at, and reaching out and
Right.
things like that.
Right. So it's interesting. I think probably one of the most important things a leader can do is know thyself first, right? Know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and don't think you know it all. But then very
Yep.
quickly on the heels of that is know others, especially the folks that are reporting to you. And I'll tell you this story to kind of illustrate what that looks like when it's not happening. So our organization is going through kind of a realignment where they're shuffling around our captains, and they're creating new roles and responsibilities to kind of shore up the administrative side of the house and introducing chief's aides. And it's probably the largest cultural change in the last almost 40 years in our organization. It is a big deal. So as you can imagine, there's a whole spectrum of how people feel about this stuff. And in my particular instance, the role that I'm in is going to be kind of absorbing a whole bunch of extra work, which on the surface is extremely overwhelming, because I already feel like my workload is too much, especially to the standard that I want to do. And that is exactly the reputation that I have. Ben wants to do a good job. He'll sacrifice home to get stuff done at work. He'll do things that others won't do that are unpopular. And so I get asked to tackle those kinds of things constantly. And I was in a meeting that I had asked for with basically a gentleman that would kind of be the top of the food chain on the shift that I would most likely be assigned to. So he's not the head of the organization, but he's the head of making the decisions I make most of the day. And I was expressing this laundry list of things, and kind of looking basically for some hope, like a degree of relatedness, like he could actually understand why I felt the way I felt. And then some hope that maybe he had some answers that he could offer me that I could incorporate to either help me feel better about it, or even strategically help me kind of meander this process. And I didn't get either of those things from this gentleman. And the comment he made that was really off-putting was about 3/4 of the way through, after I had talked about how this was negatively affecting my home life, and my wife and I were fighting, and I wasn't getting to see my kids, and I wasn't sleeping. I was developing insomnia and anxiety, and even to the point I was having chest pain, coming into work, because there was just so much stuff that needed to be doing, and I just didn't feel like I had the resources to do it. After telling him all those personal things and being very vulnerable in front of him, his response was, well, I know you, so here's what you need to do. Just don't try so hard. And he had taken its and just lumped it into this one simple statement of like, just don't try so hard. And I can remember I was very, very upset. Like, okay. So then I have to think about, like, why does he say this statement? Well, he thinks he knows me. I've known this gentleman for over 20 years. So he knew volunteer, Benjamin Martin. He knew before I got married, drunk, partying, rugby playing Ben Martin. And then he knew firefighter Ben Martin, who crashed into walls trying to do anything and everything. And then he knew Lieutenant Martin, who made early mistakes. The problem is he's not been in really any of my professional career for the last probably 10 years. And the growth that I've experienced as a person and as a leader, and even as a follower too, because that's important to consider, has been exponential, right? And part of that's because I'm not afraid to engage things, and part of that is more so I'm not afraid to look in the mirror after I engage those things and try to learn from this. And he was treating me, basically as if we were talking about something 15 years ago. And I felt so disconnected from him that moment. I didn't leave that meeting with any hope. And it really cemented my mind about, like, this is not going to be tenable to stay here. If that is the response from leadership, like, that's what I'm getting. And I tell you that story to say he doesn't know me. Like, and you're sure you're leading a group of people that you don't know, that you haven't talked to. And like, it's like, all right, well, what do you want to talk about? Well, anything. anything. When I got promoted, I started talking to people in 3 areas. I asked them about their strengths. I asked them about any opportunities they were looking for. And then we started talking about maybe some areas that they wanted to work on. And that's how we started the conversation. And by the end of the hour, we'd be talking about their children, volunteering at church, their softball rec team. I mean, anything.
Yeah.
And because that's what we're talking about. Like, it's laid like this. You can't separate those two. You can't try to talk about workload and this or this side of the house and then not think that it affects your family time and your family dynamic on this side. And so when you're talking about trying to figure out how you lead people from where they are, you've got to spend time developing that context of where they are. And it's just like getting a rookie, right? So this rookie shows up and he's been in the academy in our agency for 7.5 months. And somebody makes a decision that, all right, he's a rookie, he's a new guy, so we're going to treat him like crap until he proves himself. That guy might have 10 years in the military and have been in special forces and then volunteered for 10 years at a busy agency that runs more calls than we do. But you're like, I don't need to know any of that input. Like, I only care about what I expect from this woman. And then you could imagine that leader saying, I know you, rookie. Like, it's like, no, you don't know anything about me, about what motivates me, what scares me, what excites me. Because that's all you're doing, right? You're developing the situation, seeing how people feel about different aspects of the job. And then that's the stuff you want to give, steroids and like go for it. If you love doing spreadsheets and you hate forcing doors, but you still love the fire service, then all right, I could see you being in like a planning role or administrative role. So it's like, how do I find you as a firefighter opportunities to be on a committee to kind of see if that's exactly what you want to do? And a lot of times people get promoted before they've like investigated any part of their organization. And they have this very small perspective that is limited to riding that front right seat or even driving the engine. And they know nothing about any of the context of the organization or its members in it. And then they're like, I don't know. And one of the things I most commonly like, I don't relate, like, or I don't, he's too young. There's generational differences. And it's like, listen, I love my father who passed away this year. Love him incredibly. He was born in 1930. He was a silent generation. I didn't get a lot of positive affirmation words from him because that's not how he was raised. It was the culture of the family. But I love him and I'm loyal to him and I model a lot of his traits. And that's with, when he died, he was 89 and I'm now 39. So that's, a decade between us, but we still relate to each other because the context is so richly developed. And that's what you have to do. And you'll hear people, even if you were to ask somebody, what do you want out of this job? They'll give you a list of things that they've been consciously thinking of. But if you really spend some time around them, they'll probably talk and subconsciously reveal some things that they like are thinking about, but they haven't actually, thought out loud yet. And then when they hear it out loud, they're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or if they're thinking about something like a training instructor position is a perfect example. Administrative, it's a 40-hour work week. So a lot of great firefighters won't put in for it because it takes away their ability to do part-time, or they just don't, don't like the workload. And so one of the things I was very intentional about was hiring some of those passionate people up on overtime to help with the academy so they could come up and actually see what it was. And then that helps them relate a little bit more to like, okay, this is a workload I could do. This is a schedule I could do. Like they get to talk with the instructors that are assigned there. Like, what do you think about this place? What's it like to work for Ben? You develop it richly. And then the next conversation I get to have with them is why or why not would you want to come to training? And if they've got a good valid list and it's like, all right, good. I'm not going to like, why would I force you into something that you don't believe is fit? But if they're on the fence and I've seen characteristics and qualities in them, then maybe we try to make a play for them and we hope it works out. Or if they love it, it's like, why wouldn't we bring them in here? Maybe they're not ready. They don't have a good teaching style or a good attitude, or they're too, like a lot of times I'll have folks that are great firefighters, but they want to talk in front of recruits and they want to bash the organization, they bash its leadership. And it's like, we can't have toxic people up here in front of our newest members. So, all right, I'm gonna have some coaching conversations with you about that and we'll get that fixed and then we'll bring you up here. So all of that to say, like, if you want to lead people, you've got to know where they're coming from. And that's the simple, basic block. And you've got to spend time with them. You've got to talk with them. And you'll never do it if you're the type of officer that stays on one side of the bay while they're on the other, or you're always on the computer or watching TV while they're pulling out hose and training. You're always doing the paperwork while they're actually running call. It won't happen that way. You've got to be very intentional about making sure you're spending time with them in that capacity. and they'll show you how they love the job, and then you help them love it even more. That's really all you can do.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. A lot in there to think about and to really self-reflect on. I mean, it's big, and in my role, I'm over a couple people, but obviously I'm under a couple people as well. You get that kind of middle management area, and I don't always do it, but I feel like the times when I stop and think about what I would like the people above me to do for me or treat me like is really helpful to then put that in perspective of, okay, that probably means I should do it for the people below me as well. You know what I mean? And just really encompass the whole situation from a better perspective than just, this is how I want it, and I need to figure out how to make them do what I want type of
Yeah, absolutely.
mindset.
Yeah,
And
it's
so, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if I try to liken a lot of leadership stuff to fireground stuff, and so Dennis
Yeah.
Laguerre is a good friend and one of my favorite people to talk with, and he talks classically about, like, you have to think of things in systems. So if you want to evaluate an attack package, you can't just look at changing a tip. You have to look at the bale it's attached to, the hose line it's on,
Yeah.
the fire truck it's connected to, and then even all the way to the hydrant, right? And so leadership's the same way. So you wanting to do something for your group is like, maybe that's the hose line. And so you're trying to make these changes and get a different hose line, but you haven't changed anything on either end, right? So you haven't changed the firefighters that are the pump, and you haven't changed your leadership, which would be ultimately that bale about whether you can or cannot do something. So the more you evaluate decisions that you'd like to do in regards to thinking, how does this affect the firefighters? How does this affect me? How does this affect my bosses? And then ultimately the citizens are the tip. Like, that's like, how does it affect them? Is it effective? Then the better you'll be at kind of getting people rallied around things that do need to happen, and then also helping them understand why they can't do things that they would want to do, because they don't understand the downstream consequences of that. And a perfect example of that is, once a cycle, I asked our battalion chief to stop by the station and just talk about whatever is on his mind, whatever challenges he's got going on, even if it's with, the other shifts or neighboring stations, like whatever is creating headaches for him, I want to know about as much as he's professionally allowed to share, because I'm going to look for opportunities for us to, kind of get on his hip and help him if we can. And if we're the headache, then that's easy, right? I can fix that. But if something else is bothering him, or if he's noticing trends, then like, that's the time that I take, the time to look at our situation, go, all right, are we contributing to this? Is there something we could do? Because we transfer people all the time. So if he's got this problem at a neighboring station, and I've got a great guy leading from an informal position, like, maybe I put him in that transfer to go over there and help that shift for the day. And then that makes the battalion chief's job a little bit easier. It might make my job at my station a little bit harder because I don't have that A player. But that's the idea.
Yeah.
Like, we should be trying to plug our best people into problems, regardless of where they are. A lot of times, we just kind of focus on the world. Obviously our world is our world, and it is important. But there have been plenty of times where, like, I felt passionate about something, could not understand how anyone could possibly disagree with me, because whatever the problem was, it was 100% of my shop. But when I looked at the leaders above me, that problem might have been like 2% of their job. And they had other gators that were closer to the boat that they were trying to beat away with paddles, and mine was 500 feet still off. And so that's frustrating. But having those conversations and being intentional about sharing some of the things that are going on, and that's good stuff too. That's not just problems. That's what helps people relate, which is what we're talking about. That's what builds the relationship. The effects of that is, I can call the town chief and say, hey, I want to get an extra slot out of service to train in the evening. And he's like, no doubt, done. You don't have to sell it. No explanation needed. Like, he trusts, because of our conversations, he knows exactly before I even ask him why I need it, because I've already talked with him about it, about some of the things going on.
Yeah.
And so that's like what a true leader team looks like. And we don't really do that as much. We kind of operate in silos, and like, sometimes things go well and sometimes they don't, and I'm surprised why they don't. Nobody has a clue what anybody else is doing in the organization.
Yeah. I think a problem that has compounded this type of situation greatly, for at least what I see, is the world we live in right now. You know, where I don't know what your particular situation looks like. It's different all over the nation, but for us, I mean, we're still experiencing a lot of lockdown, air quote lockdown type situation. I never see my boss, my battalion chief. I rarely see him unless we go to that station to fill cylinders. That's about the only time I ever see him. He calls a couple times, every once in a while. I never see anybody above that, which, okay, it's fine. A lot of people, they leave us alone. We can do our job the best we can in the best way we can. And okay, that's fine. Well, but here, every 3 or 4 months, it's a priority for them to talk to us, to get the feel of the department and all this. And it's like, man, why is it a priority today when it wasn't a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago? I don't even know you're still involved in this department until just now, and you want to come and, make it a priority to make time to talk to you about an agenda that you have set up. Well, how about you just talk to us in between about what we want to talk about what's going on, about, whatever. And that is very frustrating for me. And it's leading into exactly what I was hoping to talk to. I mentioned the two areas that I need help in, and that's followership. And I guarantee you, I struggle as a follower sometimes because I don't like the direction things are headed, and that makes it very hard for me to be okay with it. And so you kind of get what I'm saying, and
Oh yeah,
and some of that
I've been there.
frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that it ties both together. It ties being a follower in with kind of meeting your people where they're at, and because just like you said, you can't meet somebody if you don't know where they're at. And so getting to know them, asking those questions, all that great stuff that you just said. Well, me being a follower, if I'm not getting that, or if I'm getting that in little pieces here and there where it's convenient for them, it makes it very hard for me to just be okay with it and give myself completely as a follower. And so, do you have anything to kind of dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, so this comes back to knowing yourself. So I'm very curious and I'm very driven. So I don't need a lot of interaction, but I do need some. And when I do get it, I need it to be quality. I consider it like the racing fuel you put in a race car, right? Don't give me any of that 87 octane stuff. Give me something I can burn, and then I'll pit, after I've run my laps. But a lot of times you get this one size leadership fits all, and they're trying to give me the 87 octane, or they're trying to give me the rocket fuel, and they're trying to give the C player rocket fuel, and it's like, dude, you're totally choking him out. Like, he doesn't know how to even process that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's no one fix to this, but some of the things that I have seen is this idea of leading by walking around, where you're actually intentionally trying to create moments where you're not busy, and you allow yourself to bump into people. And that's where these conversations happen. And this is where you gain perspective about things that are happening in their world and vice versa. And yeah, everybody is busy these days. These all hazard response models and this we can do more with less approach that we have had for decades, like that has come home to roost. And you see, I think it's kind of in a response to society, as you see societies continue to expect more and more and more and more from us, like taking people that have toe pain to the ER because they think they can get seen faster, or
Yeah.
I need you to come put a smoke detector in my house, even though it's a rental house and I'm secretly a millionaire. I don't want to pay $10 for a smoke detector, so I'm going to take advantage of your program to do it. Like, there's all these different aspects that just come crashing around. And, to say the fire chief isn't doing his job at coming to talk to me, it's not fair to say to him. Like, and that's the first thing you have to understand. And that's really the idea where we start getting into the importance of empathy and sympathy, right? And one is recognizing how someone could feel in a situation, and then the other is actually taking the time to express how you're feeling about how they're feeling, if that makes sense. So one's a "I'm sorry for your loss" card, and then one's actually sitting there and saying, holy cow, like what is it to have just lost, his father in this moment? And how would that affect his kids and family? What could I possibly do about it? It's this deeper level of reflection. And the things I think we can do as company officers and even firefighters is you want to create an environment in which leaders want to show up. It's not quite to say you get the type of leadership that you deserve, but it definitely doesn't hurt to be the company that when the battalion chief shows up, you're not bombarding him with questions that he has no influence over or constantly complaining. Because in any given day, when he's got all these priorities and all these people to see and visit, you keep doing that stuff and he's just going to drive right around you on the map, more frequently. And think about it might look great to the guys that like you're, that no nonsense lieutenant or captain, and you're going to stand up for them and do stuff. But if you're just launching needless attacks at the people above you, like you're destroying the relationship that could then very well give you information that could help your folks or create opportunities for those folks. Like if I disagreed with something that the training chief was doing and I just shoot him, a new one and told him that he didn't know what he was doing because that's not what Aaron Fields does or whatever, particular thing has got me upset. And then I have a firefighter who applies for training instructor position, right? And I'm writing a recommendation letter for him. It's like, crap, maybe I should have just shut my mouth. And you realize, there's some things I need to fight, and then there's some things I just need to get behind. So the first part is creating that environment in which they want to show up. And then part of it is like what I experienced a lot. Like I feel like I invite feedback. I feel like I ask questions that are respectful and professional. And that has not always been what people interpret. A lot of times they feel it's very challenging. Like I got a lot early in my career that was very intimidating. I'm 6'3", about 250, and I don't play that card, at least consciously I don't play it, but you forget that you're still 6'3", 250 frame, right? And when you're having a disagreement with someone, subconsciously, you're still that kind of shadow, and they're processing it at a base level of like fight or flight. And so even where you sit, like sitting between somebody in a meeting, between the door and where they're sitting, whether you take notes or not, whether you keep checking your phone, all of these things are cues to them about whether you're paying attention, whether this is a big deal or a little deal, and anything you can do to be conscious of that and then play to keeping it as neutral as possible and as positive as possible, really. That's good, right? That makes it easier to have conversations, because if you go hard on the emotion right out the gate, you've lost them, right? You've completely created a toxic follower. They're not going to remember anything you said. They're going to say things they wouldn't normally say, and then you're going to create issues for yourself. And I experienced that firsthand. That's why I can tell you it's going to happen, and it's miserable. So you've got to take some ownership of the environment you create in which you provide feedback to folks, the environment you create in which they train. Like you can't say my crew never wants to train because your idea of training is 10 hours and 110-degree heat index in full gear and turnout, like an air bottle and no rest breaks. You can't say your crew's lazy because they don't want to do that kind of stuff. Or because you're constantly training on something you want to train on instead of something they want to. And that's the idea of knowing thyself and then knowing them. It's just getting in the weeds of that stuff and figuring out what it is they do and don't need. That's stuff we can do. Stuff that I love hearing, chief officers do is this walking around stuff, right? So showing up, and not just showing up when you've got like staff notes you want to read or when you've got a problem. It's just showing up. Like, how are things going? Hey, this is what's on my mind today. What do you guys need from me kind of stuff? Looking out 3 weeks, what are you guys thinking for your training? Any of those conversations. And then the higher up the organization goes, the better. So our fire chief does station visits, right? They're intentionally scheduled opportunities where they bring in multi-companies out of service, and they get to, fire chief talks about what's going on in his world, and they get to ask questions. And it's fantastic because a lot of times hierarchy creates this insulation where if I tell you something and I'm like, hey, take that to your boss, but you don't hear me right, or you interpret it differently, then you take a different message up. Or if you don't really care, then you're not presenting it as passionately and emphatically as I would, and a sense of urgency isn't communicated. And so it's like, whatever, and then we're surprised nothing ever gets enacted. I don't know the extent that this can be done, but I was talking with a fire chief in Boston the other day, and I was telling him, like, anything you can do to your role where you can try to schedule your work, either 60-40 or 70-30, where you've actually are taking meetings and scheduling things and setting priorities to be done 70% of the time at most, and then keeping your 30% of your time open for people and problems. Like as things pop up, all of a sudden you've got like,
Yeah.
if you're not scheduling any meetings past 2 p.m. and then a problem pops up at lunch, then you know from 2 to 4:30 you've got the bandwidth to handle that. But we don't ever do that. Like we'll fill out a full 40-hour block and then the problems pop up. And then we spend time fixing that instead of with people. And I experienced this firsthand too. Like I went back to training after I had left on a part of a light duty deal. I tore my pec and I was out for a month. So I go back, and instead of having 5 instructors and 48 recruits to look after, it was just me. And so I was given work and I could start and stop it when I wanted to. And I found myself wandering around the training section, talking with the same people I had just got done working with. And I got to know them better in that month and a half of light duty than I did in 2 years assignment. And a lot of
Yeah.
it was the workload and the pressure to be successful and do a good job. And you're like, man, if I had invested in the people around me, the level of energy I was investing into the processes of that recruit academy, completely different result. And I think Frank Friscusto posted something the other day, like it takes 6 people to lift you up as pallbearers. Imagine what 6 people could do for you while you're alive if they were able to lift you up. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. So I would encourage anyone in administrative role at any rank, but especially fire chiefs, to not be afraid to say no. You know, as tasks come in, to prioritize them, you know, extremely delayed, and then really try to structure their schedules so that they have time to visit stations and get around in the community and see citizens and do stuff that they want to do instead of stuff they're told to do. Because this idea that the fire chief does whatever they want, that's not true either. Like, I don't have to be a fire chief to know that he's still got a boss, right? And there are probably, you know, grander expectations of him and his time. And what people need to understand is, like, for every rank that you go up, you're trading either a little bit more money or a little bit more influence for the ability of work to invade your life, your personal life. So the phone calls that the fire chief gets and the frequency that he gets them when he's off the clock, because he's a salaried guy, way higher than what I could expect as a captain. And to think that, like, I'm getting overworked and he's not, is just a joke, because there's no way he's not. There's just, I mean, our organization is too big and it's doing a lot of great things. And to think that I'm the only one suffering in this thing is just naive, and it's really foolish. And when you can consider some of those things and really just like, how can I help this person, which is the mindset you should have as a leader in the first place, that works up and down the chain and across your peers. It's not just something you do for your people, it's something you do for all people, right? Even people not on your shift, even people not in your department. Like, what can I do for you? And then you follow through on that, because I said so. Like, that's a phrase I've been saying a lot. Because I said I would. Like, because I said so. Like, that's why I'm doing this. I'm following through on this. People see that. People, you know, will appreciate that, and then they will model what feels good. Like, when you make somebody feel good about something, they will model that for others, because they think it'll do the same. And that's kind of how we move forward. It takes decades. Like, it's going to take another decade or two to fix some of the stuff that we're dealing with from the 60s and 70s, some of the management practices. And there's no telling what society looks like in another 10 or 15 years. But the challenges that we have coming in as company officers, when you look at this Y generation, not like the millennial tell me why, but the actual, like, heavily technology dependent, you know, for feedback, inability to have interpersonal communication because they just haven't practiced talking to people because they're always on their phone or their computer. It's very difficult for leaders to engage that workforce, which I think is probably more so what you're asking is, you know, how do you engage people and how do you engage your bosses and how do you maintain your own level of engagement? And the further apart our degree of relatedness gets, the worse it's going to be in your organization, whether that's up and down like this, or whether it's peer to peer, or whether it's supervisor to employee. The further these things are apart, the worse it is. When I played rugby, well, there's this set piece, it's called a scrum. And so maybe you've seen it, but you basically have 2 teams line up, they bend over, and then they crash into each other. And so when you think about it, you've got 3 props up front, 3 people, and then you've got 2 people behind them, and then you've got 1 person behind them. And on the flanks, you've got another 2 people. And those are called the forwards. And the 3 people set the platform coming in. The 2 people behind are the motors. They drive that. The people on the flanks are the ones squeezing the hips in so that everything is forward and nothing goes cattywampus. Because when the thing goes cattywampus, like, people break their necks. Like, it's a pretty big deal. And then the person in the back is kind of driving the strategy of when the ball is in and when the ball is out. But this tightly knit group, like, those are the best scrums. And the worst scrums are when the people, they're not squeezing the right way, they're not aiming the right way, they don't understand their role, and the strategy is uncommunicated by the person in the rear. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. And it doesn't matter the age of the person in there. It just matters, do they understand their role, job, and are they capable of doing it? And then everything else, like the mission, we can teach that. Like we can help people understand that. Not being afraid to answer the question of why. Like that's a really, like I hear a lot of people, especially older leaders, complain about people wanting to know why. That's gorgeous. That's a gorgeous question for somebody to ask you, because it tells me you care. Like that's the first thing. Like,
exactly.
Why or why not means you care. So, all right, perfect. Like let's engage that. You've already shown me that that's something you want to talk about. But when I say because I said so, it's like raising my girls. They're 9 and 7. That'll work. Like I'm your father, do as I say. That'll work for a time. But when they're grown women and they've got their own families, and I want to be a part of that, and I want to be able to still have, advice for them as a parent or as a husband, or what they're going through in their lives. If I've maintained that all the way through and continue to do that, like this is what you should do because I said so, I'm not going to give you the time of day. And it doesn't matter how good the relationship is. They're going to get tired of hearing that. And that's anybody. And I think secretly that's always been the case. I think people have always wanted to know why. I think that's just fundamentally wired into us, our anatomy and biology. The culture has been different, that people have not been allowed to ask why. Hierarchy has limited that. And what you're seeing, especially in private sectors, is freeing of that. Like, ask why. Like, we're going to, and you see it, like, private organizations are hiring people that don't have college degrees in areas that have typically had college degrees, because they recognize raw intelligence, whether it's emotional or IQ. They're like, yeah, we can train this. And they're breaking down barriers that have kind of held us. And we love tradition, right? 100 years of progress impeded by, or progress impeded by tradition kind of thing. Like, that's us. And it's not going to go away, but navigating that is going to be important.
Yeah, man, there's lots and lots there to dig into. I think first, looking at my situation and kind of what the question was that brought you to explain all that, I definitely need to get better as far as my empathy towards those above me. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on empathy below me, but as far as above me, I don't. And it's not that I don't respect them. It's not that I don't respect that they are super, super busy with things that I don't even comprehend, because I do. I totally, I know that's the case. And I don't know where the disconnect. Maybe the disconnect is just a little bit of resentment, because it is that situation like I talked about earlier, as far as, we don't exist until you feel it's necessary for us to exist, and we need to make time for that. And I think that's probably more the case than not. And that's just something I need to get better at. Just, who cares? If they want to make time to talk and get some stuff out or whatever, then let's make time to do it, and get over yourself, basically, is kind of where I am. I'm talking to myself right now. And so I definitely need to work on that as far as my followership, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's important to kind of say out loud, and I don't always follow this advice, but I think it's still good advice. You are 100% in control at all times of your reaction to anything. And sometimes it'll be good and sometimes it'll be bad. But then to blame somebody because how you reacted to somebody isn't that self-awareness piece. Like I was telling Corley, like any problem that you're encountering, any result that you have, you should look through the lens of it. At least 51% of the result is your doing. And it may not be the case, maybe way more, and it may be less, but the default setting should be, what could I have done better as a leader to do this? And that's the same thing. That's up, down, sideways, all the way across, because you're talking about how could I have reacted or done something proactively different to brought about a different result. And the thing that's maddening is when you're in this environment, it's like, I'm not getting the information I need, that I think I need at least, right? It's like, I don't have the relationships that I want. I'm not giving the opportunities that my folks need. And like, I just don't feel connected to the mission. I feel like our priorities are different. Like, those are all common issues across all departments, volunteer paid, small, large. It's all there. And that's the idea of industrial psychology. It's like, all right, what do we do to bridge those gaps and close those gaps? And it's very much what we've been talking about. Where you're trying to understand other people's perspective, or building relationships with people you can then leverage to create opportunities for others. Because there's no problem. Like when I ask somebody for a favor for somebody else, it's almost as if they don't even charge me for that favor, because they know I'm not selfishly taking it. Like when I call a chip in for me, then that's different. But if everybody's calling in favors that they're owed for other people, and then we're inherently creating more favors because of that, like that's huge, and that helps everything. One of the things I wish I had done differently in times where I wasn't a great follower was just kind of appreciate the strengths that the person does have. Like, so we all go through this, and I'm writing this article now about, like, I can't wait till I'm in charge so I can do things my way. We all go through that phase. And I think you go through that phase probably at every rank. And whether you mean to or not, we're always processing things through our own bias, our own opinions and beliefs. So, like, even day to day, how we think about somebody can change. It doesn't take much. But if you look at somebody and you're like, I would do things differently, and that's the only thing you ever think of, then you're going to miss what they are doing well, because they're in that spot for a reason. Now, you may not think they earned it. You may not think they deserve it, but they are in that spot for a reason. And if you can appreciate the strengths that they do have, and the example that I give is I worked for a captain who operationally, brilliant, tactically, sound, administratively, kind of a wreck. And his role and relationship in regards to mine, I needed him to be strong administratively, and he wasn't.
Yeah.
And he created a lot of issues because he wasn't. And it wasn't really a good fit for him. I don't know if he knew that. I don't know if the organization knew that. But for me, it was like, this is not a good fit. And so I focused a large part of my time that I spent with him on, this guy can't do this for me, or this guy can't do this for my guys or my recruits or whatever it was. And looking back, it's like, well, man, I missed so much that he was doing for us. And if I had gotten on his hip, and I always talk about that hip because that's back to that rugby scrum, and I had helped him stay aligned and forward and be like, hey, boss, what can I take off your plate that you don't want to do, or you suck at doing? Like, what can I do? And he's like, do this spreadsheet because I'm tired of doing it, right? And then he gets to focus on something that he's better at. That's not him giving me shit work. That's me helping me, right? That's me helping my recruits by swallowing a little bit of the pride and the ego that comes with thinking we're in charge of something. And then if he's able to open up his bandwidth to that, there's a good chance that he'll go then to his boss and do the same thing. And if we're all doing that for each other, all the way to the fire chief, like, then we get to keep people on what is called a sweet spot, right? Where your greatest strength intersects your greatest passion. And when people are operating in their sweet spots, like, miraculous things get done. Like Aaron Fields doing the nozzle forward, that's an example of a guy operating in his sweet spot, and OJ with what he's doing with Magic City Truck Academy. Like, that's an example of a guy, greatest passion, greatest strength. And like, you wouldn't want OJ to then teach, like, hey man, I know you love ladders, but I got to get you to teach a hydraulics class. It's like, dude, that's not, like, I'll do it because I know he rides an engine. Like, I'll do it, but that's not my passion. That's not my strength even. Do I really need to do that, or can I give that to one of my guys to do? And if you're like, yeah, absolutely, have your guy do it, and you stick to your spot, then that's good. Just be patient with your leader and be patient with yourself. And like, there's no secret ingredient for followership either. But the more that we demonstrate that, the better your organization is going to be by far.
Yeah. This is all, like, I kind of preempted this whole kind of conversation. I definitely need to hear a lot of this. And one thing, I think it ties right into exactly where we're at. And it's something I really want to hear your opinion on. So, complaining down. And this is an area that I've had to kind of figure out what I feel is okay or not. Because, and I'll just give you a little kind of story on my thinking, and I want to hear what you think. But so I've got a group of 4 other people on my crew. It's a smaller crew. It's small enough to where I feel like I have a good friendship with everybody because we're with each other all the time. We're not a crew that's like separated in different rooms and all. We are together all the time because we enjoy being together. And I feel like we have a good relationship to where anything is okay to talk about. And that's the kind of crew I want to lead. That's the kind of environment I want to, whatever you want to call it, to grow. So I I made it okay in my mind to complain down because that's my group. That's my friends. And I needed to get it out. So, it's okay to do that because that's the closeness that we have grown. Well, I don't think that's the best choice, but I feel like there's got to be some type of area because I don't have anybody else really that I am comfortable going to more than them.
Yeah.
And so what is your thinking on that? Complaining down, is it okay in doses? Is it, what level is it okay? What's the balance? Where do you sit on that topic?
So it kind of builds on what we've been talking about this whole time with this relatedness piece, right? If
Yep.
I'm a big believer of common operating picture, right? Whether you want to call that situational awareness, but like whatever is threatening us, I want my group to have as much knowledge about and about as much wherewithal so that we can effectively engage. Because that's the strength of the fire service. Like that's what we built on is this construct of the company. We don't show up to the fire scene with one mind trying to fix all the problems, unless it's the chief chasing it. But as a unit, we're showing up with 3 people. And if I don't have a plan, maybe the jump seat guy has a plan, or maybe the driver has a plan, or it's a transfer for the day. And he's like, oh, I ran a call like this. And we talk about it. And like we figure out like the solution comes usually from us instead of one person. So when you're looking at, complaining down, there's some upside, but there's also some real downside to it.
Yep.
And so the answer is when you say yes or no, it's like, it depends, which really is probably the answer to every leadership question you could ever ask. It depends. There's really no hard, absolute
Yeah.
balance. So I say this, one, it depends on the person, right? So I feel like most shifts, if not every shift, should have some person leading from an informal position. And the information you as the officer share with them needs to be, I think, relevant to the level of maturity they're showing. If they are someone you can trust to hold confidence, and they are someone that you feel will be empowered with information to help fix the problem, then I don't have any problem sharing information unless it's of such a confidential manner that professionally I can't.
Yeah.
There's no reason
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't grab my senior guy and be like, hey, man, the chief wasn't happy with our performance on that last fire. It actually has to do with how Doug was pumping the fire engine. So this is what I'm thinking to try to fix that. I'm going to get us out of service on Saturday, do 8 hours, and then I'm off on Monday. But if I arrange a slot for 2 hours, would you take Doug out and do some more stuff? And he'd be like, yeah, I'll do that. Well, here's the thing. Like, I don't want Doug to feel like this is a microscope on him. I want everybody to get these reps and sets. I want to make sure everybody goes through this thing. And you guys have this conversation, and that person is able to help and support it. Because if you don't share stuff like that, and then you just take them out for 8 hours, and they don't understand why, you haven't told them why, and then they go out 2 hours Monday when you're not there, and Doug won't tell them, or the senior guy won't tell them why, then there starts to breed this level of like, I don't know about the motivation of the lieutenant here. Like they question your motivation. And once they question your motivation, it's easier and easier and easier for them to do it. So what that looks like is you can't sit down with your senior guy and go, man, Doug screwed that fire up so bad, like so bad. And then you sit there and you shit talk, Doug for 5 minutes, and they're like, all right, here's what we're going to do. Or, I can't believe the battalion chief thinks we screwed up that fire. Like, here's the reasons why I disagree with that statement. Like having that kind of conversation, and you'll know it because if you were to take a pH test of it, and it would come back negative. If you're having that kind of conversation with your folks, then it's not appropriate. But in developing the common operating picture, and it's very much like what we're going through this realignment, right? So my roles and responsibilities are going to change, and the officers below me, their roles and responsibilities are going to change, and the firefighters are going to be affected by that. Like there's 1,000 questions they have. Like for every one question I have, they have another 2 about how this affects them. And to say you don't need to know, or I don't know, and not spend any time talking with them about it only breeds more uncertainty and anxiety, and it distracts from their focus of actually training and helping each other. They start to look inward of like, how do I protect myself, and instead of how do I do things for others? And your goal as a leader is to make it feel safe. There were many times when I was in the training section, we had significant challenges that we would pull everybody in because those were the instructors that demonstrated maturity, and those were the instructors that demonstrated professionalism. and it could hold confidence. And you're like, okay, guys, like, here's the situation. There's a disagreement happening right now between the captain and the battalion chief, and I see this playing out one of two ways. And either way, we've got to get on board with supporting this. So I'm going to tell you guys what I think, and I'm going to ask for input, and then we're going to hold until we get the result from them, and then we're going to move forward. And that way, no matter which option gets presented, they're not surprised in having to react to that. But the whole time, I'm not shit talking the captain, nor am I shit talking the battalion. I'm not saying one idea is better than the other. I'm just giving them the reality of what could it be. So in there, I think there's a fine line you can walk. But one of the things it gives you is when you're sharing this common operating picture and you're increasing the degree of relatedness. I was surprised when I got promoted to lieutenant, just how hard it was. Just how, I mean, at different variables. At first, it was easy. You get a honeymoon period. And then it got a little bit harder. And then it got, I felt like I was doing well and then not well at all. And I thought back on it. I'm like, I never saw the lieutenant struggling the way I'm struggling. And then so you call your former boss up and you're like, hey man, did you ever go through this stuff? He's like, all the time, like all the time. It's like, why didn't you ever share any of this stuff with me? Well, I can't, like, I'm not supposed to complain down. It's like, oh man, if someone's got an interest in a leadership position or wants to lead, then I don't think you can go wrong as long as they have the maturity to handle the information you're giving them, right? If they're going to be turn around and go gossip, you can't trust that person, which it doesn't sound like that's what's going on with your ship.
No.
So I think you maintain the negativity for your peers and above you, and really I would say almost your peers. Like you could call a buddy up and be like, man, I really hate this thing the battalion chief's making us do. Like, what's your thought on this? And, you know, you guys talk about it and you're like, all right, I guess it is what it is. And then when the battalion chief asks you about it, you've already kind of massaged out the raw emotion of it, and you can intelligently say, hey, like I guess I can understand where you're coming from this. Could I tell you my concerns about how that might impact us downstream and see what you think? And he's like, yeah, sure. Because he's not been a dick every time he's come around the firehouse. He knows that you're not trying to needle him or stab him with something. And you guys have a conversation and he's like, well, I appreciate your input. However, like we're moving forward with what I want to do. It's like, okay, you asked to be heard. He heard you. Now you're back to a follower, right? You got to get on board with that. But going back to the firehouse and then being like, guys, I tried, you know, the battalion chief's not going to listen to anything I say. That's not developing common operating picture. Right? Like common operating picture is that information that you need to know that people can rally around and know how to plan for, and then implement. Like that's the stuff that you're seeking out. So I hope that answers your question. Where like there's absolutely times where you can disclose things down. You just need to be very professional in how you do it. And this isn't to say, like when I talk about complaining tends to be negative, it doesn't mean you have to be positive about everything. It doesn't mean that you've got to try to sell them on something that you don't believe in, because they're going to be able to see it in your face and they're going to know you, especially if you've got a good relationship, which it sounds like you do.
Yeah.
They're going to see right through that. So you don't feed them BS, but there is a way where you can present them a very good reality, but you don't know. Like perfect example, with this realignment plan, I got hit with a group of firefighters the other day who I don't directly supervise. They have a lieutenant that I supervise, but I work with them and I care about them and I enjoy them. And there's rumors like, I hear we're sending people to another station. I hear you're getting moved. And it's like, guys, I have no idea. Talk to me about why those things would be bad. And so you listen to them, you develop the context of what's driving their fear. And you're like, okay, the best I can do is I can make a phone call and I can see if this is perhaps in the works. So because I wouldn't pay any attention to it. I know you will, but try not to give it too much attention because it's a reality that may never happen. And I would much rather have you focused on what you need to get done today with your training plan than thinking about this. And they know that I will follow up, and they know that like through my record with them that I'll ask that tough question and then I'll present information to them that's truthful. So they're able to let it go a little bit better than if I say, well, I don't know, and then I move on and I don't hear anything. It's almost like cutting a hole in the roof to vent. Like when there's heat, when there's conflict, you got to vent, right? Make that space a little bit more survivable, make it searchable so you can get to the root problem of that fire and then you can put it out. And that's what we're talking about here. I have always appreciated when people above me have shared things with me that perhaps were outside of my traditional role, just to give me an idea. Yeah. And I'm doing that now. Like with our realignment thing, I don't hesitate to call assistant chiefs, which are 2 ranks above me, and say, hey, how you doing? Like, what's going on in your world? What can I do to make your life easier? Even if they're in a completely different like battalion or district. It's just I'm interested in supporting the person in that role, not just that role. and that develops my perspective. And then I maintain their confidence and trust, and they feel more like they can help me or they can talk to me about stuff. And then I try to always use that information, if I can, positively. And like, I never hold it over somebody's head or try to turn around and leverage it for something else. It's always, if I can act on it, and if I need to get clearance to act on it, I will, but I'm always trying to offer solutions with that kind of stuff. I think that's healthy for an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned your situation with the lieutenant that you used to have, kind of going to him, and that's a little bit of my mindset is, well, I want to be real, and I don't want to pretend like, oh yeah, being a lieutenant is freaking easy. There's never any issue. Being a captain, I love it. There's never a time that I don't enjoy. I'm not like that. I don't want to be like that, and I don't want my be like that to me. I want to have some realness to our relationship, and no, I don't want it to be overwhelmingly negative. I want it to be way more positive, conversations and interactions. But life has some negative points. Life has some negative situations, and so when those come up, I think it's important to be real with those, but at the same time, get it out, deal with it, whatever level you can, and move on and get it back into the positive kind of area of the gauge. I feel like, at least.
Yeah. I would say there's a big difference between recognizing the negatives of the situation, i.e., there's water in our boat, versus actually dumping water in the boat yourself, and saying, oh, now there's water in the boat. And one diverts attention from fixing the problem to, actually creating the problem. And emotions, the problem is we mirror them and we model them. So when the leader is upset or when the leader is unsure or has anxiety about something, the people below them take that on. And even the people above them can take that on as well. Like, it doesn't take long to realize when someone's not themselves or having a tough day. And if you've ever been around a kitchen table at a firehouse and then somebody starts complaining and then the next person starts complaining and then the next person, and you get this like flashover of complaints, you're like, wow, that escalated quickly. Like, that's totally possible. And all it takes is one person to step in and do something and say something that's positive. And again, that's not, trying to dress up a shit sandwich. That is just saying something that isn't adding water to the boat. Like, I totally get this. And that's where I think leaders have a chance to shine. Like, yes, there's water in the boat. Here's what we're going to do about it. That's like, and you could even say, there's water in the boat. Here's how the water got in the boat. Now let's get the water the heck out of the boat instead of continuing to jump water.
Yep. Oh, that's awesome right there. Just that analogy again. This is why I started out this whole episode with saying how you can do well with me, because I love those type of analogies. It just kind of helps you to wrap your head around situations in different ways, and so and that makes a lot of sense for sure. Man, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I'm cutting it way short, as I've got probably half of what I wrote down still to address, but I'll definitely want to have back on to hit some of those other things for sure. But kind of time-wise, need to get other things going for the day, so I will cut it short. But man, I appreciate so much you coming on, spending some time with me, sharing your experience, your knowledge with me and with us, and so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody watching has got questions, my cell phone is on the website. You feel free to message me or call me, and we'll hook up and talk more.
Perfect. So that being said, that kind of leads me to my next question. So do you have things coming up that, lectures, classes, conferences that you want to share or tell us about, where they can find you?
So the answer is sure, right? Like, COVID has just been, COVID just wrecked everything. So I was going to be at FDIC and FRI and Firehouse Expo and Interschultz, like pretty much the large conferences, we were going to be there. And then COVID happened. So we're slated to be at those same places for 2021. It's just a matter of whether it actually plays out.
Get
But I
back.
try to keep that stuff posted, especially on the page on
Okay.
Facebook, let people know. And then probably more so, we go and do private things or regional things where people will actually come out and host a class and invite other departments to come out. And I love doing that stuff as much as I do the big conferences. Anytime
Yeah.
I can get 8 hours in front of a group is way better than 60 minutes or 90 minutes because we're just scratching the surface of most stuff. But yeah, I hope 2021 is a lot different than 2020, and we'll get back to seeing each other,
We all
and
do.
drinking
Yeah.
beer, and yeah, sharing stories. But yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to see you in 2021.
Perfect. Sounds great, man. I've loved it. I knew that I was looking forward to this because of this. Lots of things that I can leave with, just learning and areas of self-reflection. So look forward to the next time. I hope that things, like you said, back to normal, so more people can get out there and hear your message and really be touched by the things that you say. So again, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure, and thanks for the opportunity. I hope it helps.
All right.